Hi, so in this video I just want to talk about often hidden root cause of social anxiety, which to be honest I have missed for years and years. It's only been something I've started to discover really in the past year, working with a therapist myself and connecting the dots, and in order to share a few things that I've learned just in case it might help you too. And I assure you it's a bit more of a, should we say, empowering way to look at it. And you can have a bit more empathy with yourself and also see that, yeah, I might not be crazy after all. Um, so, first off, I'll just mention a little bit about my experience, and I will be walking around as I do in my videos. Is that in school I was always very quiet, I was called shy. Um, but yeah, always very kind of thoughtful and observant of what was going on around me. But yeah, just was always quiet throughout primary school, secondary school. Sometimes was teased for it, not in a severe way, but it was a theme throughout. And then coming into adulthood, I would say started to thrive, but certainly in certain settings in my mid 20s, I started to develop anxiety attacks, panic attacks, which I never experienced before. And these would often happen in public places. I wouldn't really get them at home, but they could happen in a restaurant or in a busy theatre or on a busy train or in a group meeting at work. You get the idea. And of course, once you have one panic attack or an intense experience with social anxiety, it tends to become a bit of a vicious cycle, and it can leave you feeling really trapped because you start to fear the possibility of it happening. It's so physically intense often, and you can feel shame around it as well. And so avoidance behaviors can start to come into play, and you can start to think, wow, there's really something wrong with me. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Now, I'm not going to lie and say I've figured this all out, that I don't ever experience anxiety attacks anymore. I do. And it is a battle. It is a battle, so I have empathy. But this new way of looking at it has really helped me see things more in the moment as they play out and not feel so helpless about it, and have more compassion for myself. So, really, the premise of it is that, have you ever considered that your social anxiety might actually be fueled by anger? And it might not feel like it. You might say, "Oh, I know what anger feels like. I want to shout or I want to hit something." An anxiety attack doesn't feel like that. It feels like you want to retreat. Often, feel like you want to leave that situation ASAP and hide. But I think what I've come to see is that we often miss that first trigger, that first thought or perception that then quickly develops into an anxiety attack, sort of as like a trained response in the system, because it knows it will get you to take action. So for me, like, I've always been very sensitive, I think, to fakeness. If I perceive fakeness or shallowness in others, I've always really struggled with small talk. I much prefer more in-depth one-to-one conversations where I really thrive. And I found, to be honest, a lot of, certainly the school system, it was all very performative. I didn't see it at that time, but I could see in the classroom it was performative. The social groups, the cliques, how people would tease each other. It all just seemed unnecessarily mean, quite frankly, and you just feel, I think, as a more sensitive person, like a fish out of water. Yet you had to go. There's no other choice, and that went on for years and years. And then you can find yourself as an adult in workplaces, particularly in offices and things like that, where you just have to put up with a lot of BS, quite frankly, of people being fake, ego, power games, um, jostling for power, really, trying to one up each other, um, or a lot of business jargon that real part of you is perceiving. It's like this is nuts. Like, why do we have to play this game, this performative thing? It's not who we are. And that kind of experience, you could say it might trigger fear, but I think in a lot of cases it actually triggers anger. It's I don't want to take part in this game. You know what I mean? In this system, it's I see through it. The authentic part of you sees through it, and it doesn't want any part of it. It wants to be real. It wants other people to be real, and it can feel very frustrating to be in a system where people aren't seeming to be real. It's like everyone's wearing a mask. It's kind of like a sick joke, really. Um, and I remember like my first panic attacks, for example. Um, One was in an airport, and one was in a restaurant. Um, and then one was on the tube, the London train system, going to work. Those all happened in quite quick succession of one another, and then it sort of spiraled out from there to different places. But it was always the theme of busier, louder public places where I couldn't escape quickly. That was, and still is, remains the most difficult situations for me to be in personally. But now with this hindsight view, I can see that, maybe it's not just that, what if X, say X, what if blah, blah, blah might happen, or I don't want that, I'm scared of that happening, or I'm scared of the situation in general. Um, there could be a part of that, but there's also, quite possibly for you as well, part of you that's saying, I don't want to be here. I don't like places like this. I don't like noisy places. I like calmer, more peaceful places. Or I don't like to be in cities or areas with lots of people around. I find a lot of people can be inconsiderate. People are like pushing each other, or people are too noisy, talking on the phone loudly and they don't care, or they're on their phone scrolling TikTok with no headphones and they don't care. I can share a recent experience which was very helpful for me to see, because I would have once upon a time just viewed this purely as like agoraphobia, social anxiety. But I was on the train with my partner, and we were going on a little day trip, and we sat down, and there was a guy sat behind us. I think he was a teenager. He was quite clearly on TikTok, and he was just scrolling through videos. Like every 5 seconds, it was like this very grating sounds and beeps and bops and music, and it just was going on and on and on and on and on. Sometimes he'd rewatch the same one a few times, and it'd be next one, and he was just doing it mindlessly. There was no awareness. Well, given the benefit of the doubt, say there was no awareness. He wasn't observant of how it might annoy people around him or disturb them. It could be that he did know, but he just didn't care, which is also not great, to be honest. But in the moment, I developed intense pain in my head and my neck, and I started to feel a kind of anxiety-like response. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tense up, that kind of thing. But with this new level of awareness, I was able to see, I don't think I'm actually scared per se. The sensations can be scary if you don't know what's going to happen. There's actually more anger. It's anger towards this guy, this stupid idiot, who had no consideration for others. And then it was also frustration towards the symptoms that came up, because they're uncomfortable. So I don't want this either. I don't like to be in pain. You know what I mean? No one likes to be in pain. At least most people don't. So it was kind of like spiraling in that sense. But it did at least help me to focus in on the anger rather than presuming it was just social anxiety because I'm on a train. Because it's not actually that. really. At least that can be a secondary thing that develops, but the primary thing really is anger and feeling like you can't really express the anger in that moment. Because for me, in that moment, I'm with my partner. You don't know how someone is going to react on a train if you challenge them, particularly a young man, unfortunately. Even if you like to think your country is civilized and all that, there's been all kinds of instances of say, someone carrying a knife or whatever, and they react very violently to being criticised, and I didn't want to put my partner at risk. So that generated more anger because it was like these noises are annoying from the phone. This person's an idiot, they're inconsiderate, but I also don't want to put my partner at risk. So I just have to suppress it. So these are just a few examples. Maybe you have examples of your own. Maybe the struggles you've had don't exactly play out like mine. It could be that yours are more social in the sense of actually having one-to-one conversations with people, which mine doesn't tend to play out like that. But I know a lot of people do feel awkward, or they're not sure what to say. But even then, I'd say it could also be hidden anger. Reflect on it and see, okay, in these one-to-one interactions that I'm having, is it that I'm just fearful of how the other person might react or what they might think of me? Or is it also potentially, I actually am not that interested in this person, what they have to say? There's a lot of gossip. They go on and on about themselves. They don't really ask much about me. It can be things like that. These are very common dynamics in relationships, which understandably could develop some anger because you have a feeling of I'm giving this person more than I'm receiving, and that feels unfair. Essentially, anger is like a protective mechanism when there's a perceived sense of unfairness often. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share in this video. I hope it might have been helpful, and I'll catch you next time.